is a 2006 Maybach 62, and it was the ultimate luxury sedan 15 years ago. And I mean the ultimate luxury sedan. This had a sticker price of over $500,000 back in 2006, and you were meant to buy this car and ride in the back while your chauffeur drove you around. Today, I'm going to review this amazing Maybach 62, and I'll show you everything. Before I get started, big news, this Maybach is currently live for sale right now, being auctioned on Cars and Bids, my enthusiast car auction website. It is the ultra-rare long wheelbase Maybach 62 with some amazing luxury features, as I will show you, and it is available on Cars and Bids. So, as soon as you're done watching this video, click the link in the description below, head over to Cars and Bids and check out the auction for this Maybach 62. You can bid on it and win it and buy it only on Cars and Bids at carsandbids.com. So let's talk Maybach. Back in the early 2000s, BMW bought Rolls-Royce, then Volkswagen and Audi bought Bentley, and so Mercedes-Benz decided that they too needed an ultra-luxury brand to compete with their German rivals. So they went way back into their heritage and revived Maybach, which had been an ultra-luxury brand name from decades earlier. Then in the mid-2000s, they created this, the Maybach 62. There was also a shorter wheelbase model called the Maybach 57, which I have already reviewed. But the 62 was the one to have, the long wheelbase Maybach with all of the luxury features and equipment. Like I said, this car had a sticker price of over $500,000 back when it was new, and this one has some truly amazing features which are almost unbelievable. It also has a twin-turbo V12 with 550 horsepower and about 650 pound-feet of torque. And today, I'm going to show you all of it. First, I'll take you on a tour of this Maybach and show you all of its amazing quirks and features. Then I'll get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a Doug score. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the Maybach 62 in the back because that's where you want to be. And one interesting thing is the door in back is absolutely huge, totally massive. It looks like twice the size of the front door. Now, like I said, this is the long version of the Maybach. The shorter one had a more normal rear door, but for the long version, all of the stretch was added in the back seat to optimize rear comfort. And that meant a massive door. And one crazy thing about this door, when you open it, you can see it opens basically 90 degrees all the way as far as humanly possible. And of course, the thinking there was dresses. This is a chauffeur-driven car. People will be taking it to weddings, climbing out in wedding dresses, or to galas and climbing out in ball gowns. And you need to have the entire dress be able to clear the door opening when the chauffeur opens the door. And that is why it opens so wide in the back of the Maybach 62. But anyway, next you climb into the Maybach, and there are some truly unbelievable features back here, starting with the door, which closes automatically. You press this little button on the ceiling and then the door closes. You don't have to do anything. I thought that feature was only on newer Rolls-Royce models, but it was on the Maybach as well, a power closing rear door. Since it opened so far, you couldn't really reach out to open it yourself. But that is nowhere near the coolest feature back here. That honor might go to the rear partition. In between the front seats and the back seats, there is a huge divide in terms of wealth, status, class, but also there is a physical divider, a partition. You press this little button in the center console and back, and you can raise a window, literally separating the front seat occupants from the rear seat occupants so that your driver cannot hear your conversations, which is a pretty interesting feature. But then you might be wondering, how exactly do you communicate with the driver? You're being driven around, you want to change directions, go somewhere different. How do you speak to him? Well, you could lower the partition, or you could use the intercom, press this button here, and that actually projects your voice using a microphone and speakers into the front seat so you can talk to your driver. Take a listen to me speaking from the back with the partition up and the intercom on. Here goes.
Hey everyone, Doug's the type of guy to sit in the back of a Maybach and tell you to check out cars and bids. Okay, I'm gonna try it without the microphone now. Hello everyone, this is Doug, quirks and features.
Okay, that's pretty cool, but while the driver can respond using their intercom after they've been called by the rear seat passenger, the driver cannot start a conversation using the intercom because then they would be interrupting the rear seat passenger. So, if you're driving along with the partition up and the driver has a question for the rear seat passenger, the driver presses their intercom button and it rings back here like a telephone, and then you can decide if you want to answer. Take a listen to the ringing. And of course, if you do answer your driver's call, then you can speak on the microphone on the intercom system and you can talk with the partition up. And you can use this little dial back here to adjust the volume of the intercom sound when you're sitting in back in case you can't hear the driver and you want to turn it up. That is pretty cool. But let's say you don't want to be interrupted by the driver or anyone. This is the perfect car for it. You can be in a complete cocoon back here because there are thick curtains all around you that you can close. Check this out. Press this little button and you close the curtains on the rear windows, on the doors, and they close. That's not that uncommon, but you also have a curtain on the back window that you can close. You can see it's starting to become something of a cocoon in this car. And there's even a curtain on the partition that you can close. And once you close that, then the driver can't even see in, and you even have a little curtain on this tiny triangle window next to the seats. It can be closed, and that way no one can see in through any window, and you can truly be in a complete cocoon of privacy as you're being chauffeured along in your Maybach. That is pretty cool. But we are still not at the coolest feature back here, because I think that honor goes to this ceiling. You look up and you see this ceiling, and it looks like something you might find in a modern home, but it's in your car. This is a panoramic sunroof. Currently, it is open, but not really. You can see the sun is sort of getting through, but it's mostly just gray. But if you press this button, suddenly it becomes clear instantly. But you press the button again, and it goes back to being opaque. You can't see through it anymore. And you press the button again, and now it's clear and opaque, and you can go back and forth, deciding whether or not you want to have some light coming through your panoramic sunroof, or whether you want it to be a clear piece of glass that you can see out of like a normal sunroof. You can make that determination at any time. And you can also completely close the sunroof if you want. Press this little button and a sunshade closes up over the sunroof and makes it completely dark back here. So you can really choose between 3 different stages of light coming through the sunroof depending on your current mood. The owner of this car tells me this panoramic roof was over $50,000 as an option back when this car was new, and what an incredible option it was. But there's still so much more to cover in the back seat of this car. I'm gonna go to the door panel next, and you can see all of your seat controls back here, including you have heated seats and cooled seats in the back. That's pretty special. You also have a massaging seat control to the side of the seat. You can use this to turn on your seat massagers for the back seats, which is very rare, but not surprising in a car like this. Even more impressive though is the fact that this seat can fully recline. Press this button and then you can see the seat goes into its most reclined, comfortable, relaxed position, and then you are basically laying down in the back of your Maybach 62 while you're being chauffeured around. That is pretty cool. And with the seat reclined, you can see the footrest has popped out, and even this popped out footrest has carpeting on it because every surface of this car is fine materials and well thought out and well executed and excellent attention to detail. And speaking of that footrest, the seat controls on the door even have their own control for just that footrest. So if you don't want to recline the seat, but you want your footrest out, you press this little button and the footrest can go wherever you want it, because that's the level of luxury we have here. And the door panel delivers with two more rather interesting items. For one, open up this panel, press this button, it falls gracefully open, and you can see there's this Maybach thing in here. It has a Maybach logo on it. What is this? It's a mirror. You open it up and you can see a mirror on one side and a slightly different magnification on the other side. You have a mirror, and you have the same thing over on the passenger side. So what's that about? Well, in a normal Maybach, you have mirrors that fold down from the ceiling like you would have in the front with sun visors. But if you get the panoramic sunroof in the Maybach 62, you lose those visor mirrors. So they give you these Maybach branded handheld mirrors instead. That is an incredibly cool quirk. And speaking of cool quirks in the door panel, like I said, one more, that would be open this panel, and there are headphones in here, not just regular ones, but Maybach branded headphones, again, to increase your luxury. There's no Bose, there's no sound system back here. Maybach is the only brand name you need. And the crazy just keeps coming back here. Let's move into the center console between the seats. In this top compartment, you open it up and there are champagne glasses in here, but you can see they're placed on their sides. So where do you enjoy them back here? Well, that would be on the picnic tables, of course. You lift up this center console lid. You can see there is a leather strap, of course, leather. You pull on that strap and then you unfurl the picnic tables, open them up, put them down, open them, and then you can see that's your picnic table to enjoy a drink or a meal or just type on your laptop or read while you're in your Maybach. And obviously wood and aluminum line, nothing back here is plastic. It has to be the finest materials. Now, in terms of a place to put your drinks, you also have a compartment in this car that I can only describe as a magic trick. Okay, check this out. You pop open this little compartment between the seats and you can see there are a couple of little cutouts, and that's where you're intended to put your champagne glasses. That's no surprise, pretty standard. You obviously would want a place to secure them. But if you push this compartment back in and press the second button, then you have like cup holders with depth. But I just showed you that earlier, this same compartment has champagne holders that are basically flat. So how did they do this? How did one part of it be cup holders? I don't understand. I truly think this is magic. It seems amazing. If any car would have a magic trick, I suspect the Maybach 62 would be the one. But anyway, let's go back to this area between the seats, between the backrests. Right below the compartment for your champagne glasses, you have two compartments for your DVD player back here. Consider this sort of your AV cabinet in the back of your Maybach 62. You pop these open, it controls your DVD player, and that controls the televisions in this car, which you can see are mounted on the partition directly in front of the rear seats. And when you turn on these televisions, of course, the Maybach logo appears, just to remind you precisely what you're riding in. To control these televisions, you use this remote control that comes with the car, and you can choose which television you're controlling and then adjust various menus so you can watch whatever you want back here while listening on your Maybach branded headphones. And by the way, speaking of technology back here, worth noting that in this center console, you open it up and you will find a telephone back here. Looks like an old school Motorola sort of handset thing. I guess you would get a telephone hooked up to somehow, and then you could speak to the world. No surprise to see that in the back of a car like this. It would almost be surprising not to see it. And speaking of things that you'd be surprised not to see, where is the refrigerator? Cars like this tend to have a refrigerator. Where is the one in the Maybach? It is not in between the seats. This last compartment here is just a little storage compartment, nothing special. Instead, it is in the center console. You lift up the console and there is the refrigerator, rather large enough, of course, for bottles of champagne to celebrate being a billionaire while you're being driven around in the back of your Maybach. And amazingly, I am still not done with all of the incredible features back here. Another one, on the seats, you can see at the top you have a headrest which has a beautiful Maybach logo on it, but if you want more comfort, the car also comes with a fluffy pillow, and you can attach that to the headrest and you have an even fluffier, more relaxing experience for your head. And speaking of improving your rear seat experience, of course you have your own climate controls back here, one for each seat, dual zone in the back, no surprise. The surprising thing is the climate vents. They are not just tiny vents hidden in little spots that barely bring air to you. Instead, you have real climate vents back here. One here on the ceiling above the door, another one on the partition, again a large climate vent like you might have in the front, and you also have more climate vents in the center on this other center console near where your feet are. So you really do get the full effect of climate control back here, not just like two crappy little vents that they hope will do the job. And amazingly, still not done with all the incredible features back here. It really is wild in the back of this car. But anyway, in the front part of this compartment on the ceiling, you can see 3 gauges. You may have seen them earlier. Over on the right, the gauge tells you the current temperature outside. No surprise. In the middle, that's a clock. It tells you the current time. And over on the left, it is a speedometer, a second speedometer after the one in the driver's gauge cluster. So while you're sitting back here, you can always monitor your driver's speed. If you think he's going a little too fast, just use your intercom and tell him to slow down. And next up, we move on to the front seat of the Maybach 62. But from the moment you open the front door, you can tell this is not a car intended for the driver. It really is intended for the rear seat occupant, in case you couldn't tell from all that luxury stuff. I say that because there's just not all that much space up here. You can see the partition intrudes into the front seat area, and the seat is currently as far back as it goes, and it's just not really all that far back. In fact, I'm sitting here and you can see my knees are basically brushing up against the underside of the dashboard next to the steering wheel. There's just not that much space in the front of this car, despite how huge it is. Instead, all the space is reserved for the people in back, because they were the ones spending the money on the car. But even though this car was rear focused, there is still some amazing stuff up front. For instance, press this little button where you'd expect the glove box to be, and this compartment drops and a phone rises out of the dashboard and presents itself to you automatically. Obviously, the actual phone is long gone and it would be incredibly outdated technology by now anyway, but that must have been the coolest party trick in the world 15 years ago. A phone rising from your dashboard at the push of a button. That's pretty intense. Obviously, the other button on the other side of this is the glove box. You press that, the glove box opens, and it reveals the largest owner's manual you will ever see at any capacity ever. Frankly, that's not surprising. There was a lot to cover with this car, and the owner's manual covers it all. But speaking of stuff that pops out, how about this little wood compartment behind the shift lever? You open this up, and there are some coiled up things in here. You push, and that's a front cup holder. It pops out, reveals itself, and then you can put a drink in it. And when you're done, you can store it right back in this little wood compartment, so you don't have to have cup holders in your face at all times. Now, also in this little wood compartment, you have a few switches in here. These are the controls for your rear curtains. Again, all of the curtains for rear compartment can be controlled right here. Now, I showed you before, the rear seat passenger has access to those same controls. But if they don't even want to lift a finger to close the curtains, they can use the intercom, call the driver, please close my curtains, and the driver can do it for you. That is a luxurious touch. And the driver has other controls for the rear seat passengers back here. You have a sunroof control in the normal place where you'd see a sunroof control on the ceiling next to the rear view mirror, except there's no sunroof over these front seats. That is the control to open or close the rear panoramic sunroof sunshade. It can be done up here. Again, if the person sitting in back doesn't want to do it themselves, they can ask the driver and it will be done for them. And some other interesting controls in here. How about on the door panel where the seat memory is, you have 5 different seat memory controls. Most cars have 2, maybe 3. This has 5 because if you have different drivers, maybe they work different shifts, different chauffeurs, you want different seat memories for each one so they can all program the seat to the position that makes them the most comfortable. And also on the door panel, check this out. You push this little black button and a compartment opens up gracefully and it reveals a CD storage slot, so you don't have to worry about storing your CDs in some compartment where they'll crash around and get scratched. You have them at easy reach right at your fingertips in the door panel in a dedicated slot. Pretty cool. Next up, something I always loved about the interior of these Maybachs. They have about the same steering wheel as many Mercedes models from this era, the S-Class and others, but one big difference, the steering wheel buttons are wood. instead of plastic. A regular S-Class had the same buttons, the same steering wheel, but they were black plastic. These are wood. Everything in this car is either wood trim or chrome or some sort of carpeting. Even the plastic steering wheel buttons are trimmed to look like wood to make that experience even more luxurious. And truthfully, that attention to detail is all throughout this car, pretty much everywhere you look. I showed you a lot of those luxury features in back, but even the littlest things, like for example, the font used in the gauge cluster. You can see this beautiful upscale Mercedes-Benz font, gorgeous, and they've used that to emphasize this car's luxury and gracefulness with a matching font. You also have beautiful wood trim everywhere up front, including this 3-level wood trim that starts on the door panel and then goes into the dashboard, and it just looks great. Very distinctive, different from a lot of other stuff I've seen in cars, these like 3 levels of wood. Looks cool. Another great piece of attention to detail is the sun visor. You drop the sun visor and you have a visor mirror, of course, like most cars, but you also have a second magnification of visor mirror. You can choose 2 different ways to look at yourself depending on the zoom that you want. That's pretty impressive. And speaking of the crazy luxury in here, let's start this car. Before I do that, I want to show you the key. Fairly standard Mercedes-Benz key, except on the reverse you have the Maybach logo, of course. They wouldn't just give you Mercedes-Benz. They wanted everything to be bespoke to the Maybach. But anyway, you start the car, turn it on, and it is unbelievable how quiet it is when you're first starting it. You do not hear the engine like you do in so many other cars. You can barely tell that this thing is running or hear the starter going to start the engine. Incredibly quiet. No surprise given this car's market position. Same deal with the door locks, by the way. You press this little button in the center console to lock or unlock the doors, and when they lock and unlock, they don't make that door lock sound you're used to hearing. Instead, nothing. Silent. Take a listen to the doors locking and unlocking in this car. But anyway, next I want to move outside the Maybach and I want to talk styling, which was this car's greatest failing. I say that because it looks like an S-Class, which is too bad because nothing on the outside of this car is shared with the Mercedes S-Class of its day. Nothing. Every single panel and piece and part of this design was unique to the Maybach, but it simply looked a lot like the S-Class. And frankly, that really was this car's greatest failing. They created a truly bespoke, ultra luxury, incredibly expensive, opulent sedan, and then somehow they managed to make it look like a car that cost way less money. A big mistake, and in my opinion, a big contributor to this car's eventual failure. That and the economic recession, the fact that it just wasn't distinctive enough. Think about the Rolls-Royce Phantom and how clearly identifiable that car is. You didn't have that with the Maybach, which just looked like a big S-Class. One crazy thing about this car is these wheels. These are not S-Class wheels, distinctive special Maybach wheels, but they look just like this S-Class wheel from the era, and a quick glance you wouldn't even know that it's different, but it was. They just made it look the same. What a mistake. With that said, there were some clearly identifiable differences between the Maybach and the regular S-Class of this day. One big one is this rear light bar going around the back. The regular S-Class did not have it. You could always tell when you were behind a Maybach if you saw this giant taillight in back. It was something a little different, a little bigger. Another way to tell apart the Maybach from the S-Class, most of them were two-tone. You can see this one is dark blue on the top and light blue on the bottom. You couldn't do that in a regular S-Class, but you could in the Maybach, and most people did. It was a very distinguishing, very opulent feature, two-tone instead of normal one-tone paint, like a plebeian. The other big way you could tell apart the Maybach from an S-Class, honestly, was just how big this car is. It's difficult to convey it when I'm standing here, when it's parked with no real frame of reference, but this thing is huge. And when you see these on the street, you can instantly tell. It is wider, it is taller, it is longer. It is a huge car compared to the S-Class of its day. When they were parked right next to each other, it didn't look a thing like the S-Class. You knew you were looking at something totally different. It's just a shame the styling was pretty much the same. And next up, a few more notable items about the Maybach. One is the pronunciation, which is right here. This is the correct way to say it, Maybach. Anybody who says Maybach or Maybach or Maybach, it's all wrong. Maybach is correct. People have tried to correct me about this before, but they are wrong. The Germans say Maybach, and that is the way you're supposed to say it, despite how it might be spelled. Now, one other exterior item I want to talk about is on the roof. In the back, you have the big sunroof, of course. In the front, you have solar panels, which is pretty cool. The intent of these solar panels was that they would get sunlight, obviously, and then the panels would power the climate control system and keep fresh air blowing in the car even when it was turned off. And that is pretty cool. You climbed inside the Maybach after it had been sitting in the sun for a while, and the air wouldn't feel so stale because you have fresh air blowing in periodically, thanks to the solar panels. But anyway, we move on to the trunk next. You open it up and it pops open automatically, of course. And you can see nothing really special back here. Actually, it's just a trunk, and frankly, kind of a small one given this car's size. All of the focus in this car was really put into the back seat area, and so the trunk and the front seats kind of lost out a little bit in terms of sizing. With that said, there is one interesting item worth noting in the trunk. On the bottom of the trunk lid, you can see this strip here is chrome. Every other Mercedes-Benz model from this era, it was plastic because it's the bottom of the trunk lid, and who cares? But for a Maybach, they know you will see it periodically when the trunk is up, so it has to be chromed. Everything has to look great, no matter how small of a detail and how infrequently you will see it. That's a pretty cool touch. And finally, we move under the hood in the Maybach. You open the hood, you can see the engine, twin turbo V12 with this cover on top with the Maybach logo, of course. This car had about 550 horsepower and about 650 pound-feet of torque. Impressive figures. Now, admittedly, this was the same V12 used in the top-level S-Class at the time. This is the biggest component that the two cars shared, but they weren't going to develop a whole new V12 just for the Maybach, and it was more than adequate as an engine. Although later Maybach models did get even more power than this offered, over 600 horses and almost 750 pound-feet of torque, but I feel like this was more than adequate, even in spite of this car's massive size. And so those are the quirks and features of the Maybach 62. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the 62. This thing is so baller. It is so ridiculous and opulent and crazy if you know what to look for. You know, I mentioned this already in the video, but most people just don't know. I have spent the last day, basically, because there's so many quirks, filming this car in a public parking lot, people coming, going, whatever. Not a single person walked up to me, which is very rare. Especially with a special car, but this isn't a car that most people think is special. It's just an old Mercedes. So first thing I noticed driving this car, unbelievably tight up front, just incredible. I'm like 6'3", 6'4", and it is hard up here. I have the seat all the way back and my knees are up against the dashboard. It truly was built for the rear seat passengers. And the funny thing is, a couple more inches would have been nice, and it wouldn't have really mattered back there. Like, there's so much space back there that I can lie down and have room. But this car was all about the rear seat, and the driver didn't really matter all that much. If you wanted a Maybach that you could drive, they had the 57, the shorter wheelbase model, which had more room in front. But that wasn't the point of this one. This was the series car, and these were incredibly rare. Mercedes was selling, I think, like 100 or 150 of these in the US a year, incredibly small, and the 62 was like 20% of sales. Like, everyone bought the short wheelbase. It was way cheaper. This was just a very, very special vehicle. So the driving experience, unbelievably comfortable in this car, just tremendously so. You hear nothing happening on the outside. And I should have mentioned it, but this car has these double pane windows with like black trim around the edge where they like grip the panes together. Oh God, it is beautifully quiet in here. Just so calm and serene. Unbelievably so, especially for a car from 2006. Now, one thing about this car is it is pretty big, although you don't really notice the size while you're driving it all that much. It doesn't drive huge. It's a big car in the sense that it has a big engine that's not really tuned for performance, so it's kind of lumbery as a car. Like, you accelerate, it's not necessarily what I would call fast, but it has power, but that's not what it's tuned for. Like, it's intended to be a slow building, relaxing engine increasing in power. The performance is something. It's very nice. It has a lot of torque, so anytime you put your foot down, you are going. But it does take the transmission a second or two to gear down, because that's all comfort based. There's no shift. There's no, like, you don't feel shifting in this car. It just sort of happens in the background. It really is nice. It really does feel like you're wafting around in one of the most luxurious cars. Even by modern standards, 15 years after this car came out, this still feels more comfortable and quieter than modern, like S-classes, like nice luxury sedans. This is even better than them. The ride quality especially is better. It's unbelievable. Going over bumps and speed bumps especially, you feel almost nothing. It is so incredibly smooth and comfortable in here. Obviously, like, the infotainment tech is nowhere near the modern era. And, you know, the buttons and switchgear, you look around and it's starting to kind of feel a little bit old. But for its purpose, which was just pure luxury, it still feels like pure luxury. Really, this is the one you want to be driven in. There's no question about it. And I think part of the problem with the 62 selling was not that many people want to be driven here in North America. It's just not a common thing like it is in some other places, like in Asia and Europe to an extent. It's outside of New York City, there's not that many people with a driver. And so these just didn't really sell all that well. But man, if you had a driver sitting back there, playing with the sunroof, closing yourself in the curtains, it would be everything. Overall, I must say I'm pretty impressed by this car. It's been about 4 years since I drove a Maybach. I did a 57S video, maybe 3-4 years ago. And that was impressive, but the 62 is on a totally different level. It feels about the same in terms of comfort and luxuriousness and all that, but the backseat stuff in the 62, I mean, it was a car that was truly built for ultra luxury people. The 57 was ultra luxury people, but the 62 was an even different level from that. And this car feels it. It really does. And so that's the Maybach 62. This was truly a limo that you could buy for yourself. Hire someone to drive you around and impress anyone who really knows luxury. This car was not as in your face as a Rolls-Royce Phantom, but it was every bit as luxurious and as expensive. And I am thrilled to have this amazing car on Cars and Bids. Anyway, now it's time to give this Maybach a Doug score. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the 62 is fine, but not amazing. The lack of an individual style over the S-Class is its biggest issue, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in the low 5-second range, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Handling isn't sharp, nor is it intended to be. This is a big car, and it has soft suspension to maximize ride comfort, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Fun factor is okay. The fun of this car is sitting in back, not driving in, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Finally, cool factor, and that's much higher. My head turns all the way around when I see a Maybach 62 on the road, which is never that long wheelbase. As these ultra luxury sedans go, this has to be one of the coolest, and it gets a 7 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 23 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. This car has some good modern tech, but mostly it has amazing amenities in back, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Comfort is a mixed bag. The ride quality is amazing, just as good as a modern S-Class, if not better, but front seat comfort isn't great because it's tight up front. Rear seat comfort, of course, is truly incredible. I'll split the difference at 8 out of 10. Quality is nice enough, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Practicality is fine. It has tons of room, which should bump up this score, but it's also too big to, like, park anywhere, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Finally, value, and these are a fraction of their original price, but they're still relatively expensive given the aging tech. It gets a 6 out of 10 for a total daily score of 33 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 56 out of 100, which places it here against similar cars. The 62 easily beats out the Maybach 57S I tested. The 62 is simply more special and more exciting, period. The 62 does well in this company, though I haven't yet tested its closest rival, a Rolls-Royce Phantom from this era.